All right, thank you all so much for doing that. I really appreciate it. So jumping right in, first thing I want to do is lay the groundwork and just kind of go ahead and open the space for you to share a little bit about your experience so far in the world of work. So first, I want you to think about your experience with the hiring process, and I mean the entire process. So searching for a job or an internship, and then crafting a resume, the vulnerability of actually sending out that resume, actually pursuing those opportunities, waiting to see if you hear back if you get an interview, and then actually doing the interview, again, waiting to hear if you get the job and actually finally getting the job. I want you to think about that entire process and think about one word that sums it up for you. And I want it to be a feeling word. So some sort of emotion that you have experienced across that process. And if you feel comfortable, I would love it for you to put that one word in the chat once you have it. All right, we have stressful, overwhelming, tiring, a lot of nerves. Yeah, I really appreciate you guys' openness and honesty. It's hearing a lot of nerves, a lot of anxiousness, and a lot of stress. Um, and those are completely normal experiences, and we're going to talk about those more throughout our chat. Um, Tonight, I want you to hold on to that, and then I also want you to think about your experience at the current job that you're in, either your current job or the program that you're in and the classes that you're doing. And I want you to think about one word that describes the experience that you have while you're actually doing that job. And once you have that word, again, I would like a feeling word if you can, if you want to put that in the chat as well. I've seen the word supportive come up a few times, rewarding. Yeah, thank you all for sharing those. So it sounds like the process ahead of the job is bringing up a lot of these feelings of nerves or anxiety. And it sounds like the experience in the current job is generally positive. I want you to hold on to both of those experiences as we talk through the feelings that we're going to talk through tonight. Um, One thing that I really want to highlight is that all of those experiences on both ends of the pendulum are normal. Um, and to amplify that, I want to share some statistics. So this is from the American Institute of Stress just a couple years ago, put these out. 83% of workers in the United States are impacted by stress that's related to their work. That's a very, very far past the majority. That's a very big statistic. And not only that, but also 76% of workers say that their personal relationships are starting to be impacted by the stress that they're experiencing at work. And so work-related stress is very, very normal and very common, but there are ways to manage it and ways to get ahead of it. And right now, in our position, we're emerging professionals. We're going from school into the workplace, and we're just starting to kind of bud into this professional world. And so this is the best time to kind of get ahead and be proactive about managing those feelings and figuring out what's going to work best for us so that that stress doesn't impact our lives and our personal relationships. Something else that I really want to highlight is this big picture perspective, because a lot of times when we talk about self care or putting yourself first, there can be kind of the stigma that it's selfish to do that. And what I want to highlight is that according to the most recent data, job stress has costed an estimated 300 billion dollars a year in losses across industries. And this can be related to people not being able to show up to work, decreased productivity when they do show up at work, as well as accidents. And so I bring that up to say that when you are prioritizing your well-being at work, you're not only doing it for yourself, you're also benefiting your employer and your industry as a whole. And so I want you to keep that in mind tonight as we talk through these experiences as well. So one of the main things that can come up, I mentioned that we're emerging professionals as we're entering into the world of work. We are professionals right now. We're just emerging. We're just very, very new to the professional world. And one thing that can come up is imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is this idea that you don't deserve the things that you have, or someone might find out that you actually don't deserve the place to be in the place where you are. And so we held a workshop a couple years ago about imposter syndrome, and we asked students for some feedback about ways that this showed up in their internships or their first jobs. And these are a couple of the experiences that they shared. First, they talked about self-imposed barriers. So as they were looking for jobs, as they were in that job searching stage of the hiring process, they would see the qualifications, see that maybe they met 80%, but they didn't meet those other 20%. And so they wouldn't even bother to apply for the job because they didn't have all of the qualifications. Maybe they did see that they had all the qualifications, but they still couldn't connect themselves or they couldn't visualize themselves within that position and then they didn't apply. Another important thing is comparison. So most jobs, not all, but most jobs that you're entering into, someone will have had that role before you. And so not only are you breaking into this role trying to form a good first impression, but you're also having to fill the shoes of the person that came before you. And so that can turn into imposter syndrome very quickly when emerging professionals are comparing themselves to the person before them. Another way that can show up is perfectionism. So we all have these areas of achievement and we also all have areas of growth. But sometimes we can tend to underestimate our achievements and overemphasize the things that we don't have. And when that happens, perfectionism starts to bud because we're constantly striving to get closer and closer to perfection and disregarding the achievements that we already have. And these are achievements that could be really helpful in building our confidence as we're entering into the workplace, but we're ignoring them and we're looking at the things that we lack and trying to get more and more of that. It's always great to better yourself, but when it turns into perfectionism, then that can lead into imposter syndrome as well. Um, and the last thing is impression. So typically in college, you're around a lot of people who are in a very similar life stage to yourself. And once you go into the workplace, that completely shifts. And you're with people who are in all different life stages, people who have been working that job longer than you've been alive. Um, and there are opportunities for leadership in every single role. But students were saying that they struggled with leadership because of their age or because of their lack of experience. And so it was really hard for them to think about their qualifications and the reasons that they were in that job and to use those as their motivation to be a leader rather than just thinking about their age or the things that they don't have. And so those are all ways that people can experience imposter syndrome. Um, and so I want to make it a little bit more personal to your situation. So I went around and I interviewed some students at Clemson about ways that imposter syndrome has showed up in their lives or their current work or internship experiences. And I'm not going to read all of these, but I do want you to kind of look at some of the themes and think about how these might apply to things that you've experienced. This feeling of you're not sure if the world should take you seriously, or feeling like there may have been some mistake. You're not smart enough to be at the company. Every time you open your mouth, you have to prove yourself. This word fraud comes up a couple times, feeling like you don't deserve any of what you've achieved. Um, and so I just want you to reflect to yourself if any of those experiences sound similar to something that you've felt so far in your experience. And if you do resonate with some of that, I want to tell you two things. Number one, these are completely normal feelings to have. And number two, these feelings do not have to limit you. And the reason that I know they don't have to limit you is because these actually aren't Clemson students. These are some of the most successful people on the planet. And all of these people, even at the very top of their game, they still experience these emotions, but they're able to manage those feelings effectively. And those feelings don't have to define them as a professional. And so what's really at the heart of imposter syndrome is limiting beliefs. And limiting beliefs come from a fixed mindset. So we can have a fixed mindset or we can have a growth mindset when we go into a new situation. And what a fixed mindset looks like is I put a couple examples here. First, failure is permanent and it's a direct reflection of my self-worth. Another thing that a fixed mindset might tell you is that new experiences are intimidating, and because they're intimidating, they should be avoided at all costs. And another limiting belief from a fixed mindset is that if I don't have the skills right now, I never will. And these beliefs, they don't have to be overtly playing in our minds. They can just be kind of playing in the background of our mind as we're navigating through the world or as we're making decisions. Even if we aren't consciously thinking these exact thoughts, they can inform the ways that we show up in the world and the ways that we show up in the workplace. And the way to combat these beliefs is by taking the fixed mindset and turning it into a growth mindset. And that's through a process called reframing. So I've gone ahead and reframed a couple of these beliefs here. Um, The first one was failure is permanent and it's a direct reflection of my self-worth. So the reframed belief is I'm free to fail and incorporate constructive feedback. Mistakes do not define me. So what I want you to notice here is that in this reframe belief, it still addresses the reality of failure. It doesn't say, oh, you're not going to fail. It's totally fine. It says, yes, failure is an option, but you are free to fail. And when that happens, you're going to address it by finding constructive feedback and incorporating that feedback. And when those mistakes happen, they don't define your self-worth. The next one is new experiences are intimidating, therefore they should be avoided. And the reframed belief is that new experiences, yes, they can be intimidating, but they're also opportunities to expand your perspectives and your capabilities. So notice again, it still completely addresses the fact that new experiences can be intimidating. Notice it changes the word are intimidating, which is very black and white, either or, to they can be. Some new experiences are great. Some new experiences might be intimidating. And when this happens, there are also opportunities to expand the perspective that you have and to gain new capabilities. Um, and so, knowing what we know now about moving from a fixed mindset into a growth mindset, I want you to think about this last example. If I don't have the skills now, I never will. And what I want you to do in the chat is to just rewrite it in one sentence, write a new version of this bullet point that's going to come from a growth mindset that still addresses the reality of the problem, but looks at it from a different perspective. So if you want to go ahead and do that really quickly for me, I'd appreciate it. Great. If I don't have the skills, I can learn them. I may not have the skills to do this now, but I can learn how to. Yeah, I really like these. A lot of people are using that word learning, which I really appreciate, but may not expected to have all skills mastered and I can learn new ones. I like that as well, going ahead and saying those expectations that you're not expected to walk into the workforce knowing everything and having every skill yet. This role has skills that I have yet to practice or learn, but I will grow with this. I really appreciate how everyone is emphasizing practicing and learning, and that's really what's at the heart of a growth mindset. And so, yeah, these are great responses. Thank you all so much for participating. As we're talking about a growth mindset, something I want to highlight is something that our center has put together called the core competencies. We've done research for years and we've put together these 9 competencies that are these underlying skills that employers are looking for across any industry. So employers in each industry are looking for really specific skills related to whatever field they're in, but underneath there's this layer of 9 skills that employers everywhere are all looking for, and that is communication, collaboration, leadership, adaptability, analytical skills, technology, a sense of self-awareness, integrity, and ethics, and then your professional brand. And the great news is that we all contain some level of every single one of these competencies already, and we all have opportunities to grow in these competencies. And so, as we're talking about reframing beliefs, I want you to think about these competencies. Think about the ones that you're aware of already that you've used in your life. Because if you're going into a specific job in a specific field that you haven't worked in before, you may not have all those skills and that specific expertise yet, but you do have those underlying competencies from your past experiences. You do know how to collaborate with people. You do know how to communicate and adapt your communication to different audiences. You have a lot of these skills, even as a Clemson student. There's so many of these skills that you're constantly working on. And if I can like drive in one thing tonight, it's that it is not an accident that you ended up where you are. Being at Clemson is not an accident. You have to do a lot of work in high school to keep your GPA up and to do extracurriculars and set the scene so that you can apply, get in. And then once you get in, you have to do a lot of work to actually stay here and to keep your GPA up again. And now, as you're looking for opportunities and you're moving from school into the workplace, um, again, none of that is an accident. It's a lot of intentional work that you're doing and putting yourself out there, and employers are seeing those competencies in you and deciding to hire you. So we're going to do one more example. And this is a little bit more related to a specific situation that you could be in as a student. So we're going to look at a limiting belief. I'm bound to fail at my financial analysis internship because I don't have any experience in this field. I'm just a waiter. So we hear that a lot from students in our center is I'm just this or I'm just a barista right now. And those jobs are so important because they're giving you a lot of these underlying competencies that once you finish your degree and you get into a job in your field, you're going to have this great foundation that's already built of professionalism and knowing how to navigate some of these workplace aspects. So as we look at reframing this specific belief, I want us to ask a couple questions. So first, what are you learning in your courses? Um, Oftentimes it can be easy to kind of forget that you actually are constantly learning so much about this field in your classes, even if you don't have direct experience in the field yet, you still are constantly doing projects and learning from your professors, doing this initial networking to learn so much about your field. Also, what core competencies that I mentioned earlier have you gained as a waiter? There's a lot of communication that happens. There's a lot of adaptability, constantly shifting and changing. How did you end up in this position? I mentioned earlier that feeling of you're not here by accident. So think about the fact that a lot of work went into the fact that you're in this job now, and that employer saw something in you and wanted to hire you. And finally, as I've been talking about, the growth mindset does not ignore problems. It just looks at problems from a different perspective. So the problem here is this idea that you may fail or you may not succeed fully. And so it's helpful to really consider, what if you don't succeed? What if you set a standard for yourself here and maybe you meet it here at first and you're not quite all the way there? What is that going to look like? And so after asking these questions, I've put a couple example ways to reframe this belief. I'll say it again. It's I'm bound to fail at my financial analysis internship because I don't have any experience in this field. I'm just a waiter. So some ways that we can reframe this is the new job is an opportunity for me to build on the foundation that I have in my finance classes. Another one is my previous job has equipped me with valuable collaboration and adaptability skills. My employer recognized these skills in me and selected me for the position. And finally, if I don't immediately achieve success, because that could be a reality, if I don't immediately achieve success, I will have opportunities to learn and adapt. And that really ties into a lot of the things that you guys said earlier in the reframe beliefs exercise. So moving from imposter syndrome, another really important mental health aspect to think about as you're entering into the workplace is this idea of work-life balance, balancing between your professional life and your personal life. And you'll see there's a pie chart here with a big X on it, because typically when we think about work-life balance, we think about this kind of ratio of work's going to get 40% of my life, school's going to get 30, friends are going to get 10, maybe sleep gets 20 if you're lucky. And we kind of set up this percentage model and then put it on autopilot. And that's kind of the vision that a lot of people have when they think about a work-life balance. And that sounds wonderful in concept, but life is complicated, unfortunately. And so work-life balance, I want us to move away from this model of just being able to set something in stone and keep it going. And instead, I want us to think about work-life balance as a constant ongoing process of self-awareness that you engage in all the time. Because different areas of your life are going to require different levels of priority at different times. And so using this self-awareness, which you may remember was a competency that we talked about earlier, that's one of those underlying skills. And this is an area where it becomes really valuable in the workplace, is to check in with yourself and be aware of your needs and your emotional needs and what needs to take the priority at different times. And the word that I really want to use for this is aspirational. It's never something that we're fully going to achieve. We're never going to perfectly achieve a work-life balance. It's something that we can constantly be aspiring towards, making sure that we're taking care of all areas of our lives. And so there's kind of three steps to this. There's reflection, setting boundaries, and utilizing supports. And we're going to walk through each of these tonight. So the first is reflection. So if you have a piece of paper and a pencil nearby, or maybe do it on your notes app on your phone, um, just find some way that you can follow along here. We are going to do a reflective exercise. We're going to take an 8-question scale from the American Institute of Stress. It's been empirically validated, been used for a long time. And what I want you to do is I want you to think through each of these questions. And I want you to think about maybe you are balancing a couple jobs right now, maybe you're doing school and a job on the side. I just want you to think about the entirety, the sum of all the work that you do as you think about each of these questions. And I want you to just go ahead and rate yourself real quick. We're not going to share this with anyone. This is fully just for you. Um, Rate yourself between never, rarely, sometimes, often, or very often, how you feel about each of these questions. And when you get to the end of the 8 questions, go ahead and tally up or add up the numbers. And then once you have a total, if you could just type done in the chat. So I'm going to give you all a minute to do that. And then, yeah, just type done in the chat and we'll move on. All right, thank you all for doing that. Looks like everyone finished up at about the same time. I'm going to move on to the reflection. So what I want you to do is think about your score. And this is the chart that the creators of the scale created. And so these words, I know seeing the words potentially dangerous can be a little daunting. This was a very self-reported activity that you just completed. And this is the language that the creators of the scale used. So do with that what you will. I know that that can bring up a lot of overwhelming feelings. If you want to talk later, you can. But if you notice that your number is not score, it doesn't mean you necessarily need to call 911 right now. It's just something to be mindful of. So what I want you to do is think about where your score is at along this continuum, and think about what went through your mind when you saw the score. And something you can do is just write down again. Think of one feeling word, and you don't have to put it in the chat this time, but just write it down underneath your score or type it out if you were doing that on your notes app. Maybe you were surprised, maybe you felt validated, maybe you felt concerned. Um, and it can be really helpful to actually have some place to operationalize what we're feeling, because you can say, how are you feeling today? And it can be very open-ended. And so to put a number to it and to have some kind of scale of actually gauging where you are can be really helpful as you're thinking about how you're going to set boundaries or how you're going to move through the workplace in the future. I also want you to think about if anything surprised you about your score. Were you about kind of where you thought you were along this continuum? Maybe you were a little bit lower, maybe you were a little bit higher, and you're thinking about ways that you may want to decrease your work-related stress and strategies that you can use. And so we're going to talk through some of those next in the setting boundaries section. So boundaries can start before you even get the job. When you are in the hiring process, there is this magical question that pretty much every employer is going to ask you no matter what the interview is. And that's at the very end. They're going to say, do you have any questions for us? And this is your opportunity to ask them anything you want. And so these are some ideas of ways that you can use this question to your advantage to really kind of gauge the culture of the company. So one question is, what are some things that you look forward to at this job every day? Another one is, what would a typical day in the life look like for me in this position? And that gives employers the opportunity to kind of walk you through what the day-to-day would look like for you, and you can decide if it's a good fit. This last one is my favorite because it really shows that you've done a lot of research on the company and shows that you're really thinking about the values of the company and how those values align with you. It would be to look at their website or to look at some of the information that they have and to see something that they're really loud about. And then ask them, I know that teamwork is an important part of your mission, or communication, maybe it's diversity or inclusivity, something that you think is going to be a really important value to you that you see reflected in those companies' mission statements. Ask them about it. And then you can ask them, can you describe what that looks like? And that will give them an opportunity to really tell you what those values look like in practice. Um, as you're asking these questions, it's important to evaluate the employers, both the words that they're saying, but also their body language. If you're interviewing with two employers and you ask them a question about the company culture and you see them kind of give each other a side eye, that's all the answer you need, no matter what comes out of their mouth. And so it can be really helpful to think about, are they really struggling to think of things that they look forward to at the job every day? And even if they do give you an answer, does it take them a really long time to think of something? Again, what would a typical day in the life look like for me in this position? How are they answering that? Do they seem very enthusiastic about the work that you would be doing? Do they seem very supportive? And these can be things that are just helpful to kind of think about those dynamics. Everybody has a different work style that works best for them. So being able to, this is a great opportunity to kind of see how your work style is going to align with the company. Once you get the job, so we are able to set a lot of professional boundaries, and they're becoming increasingly more important as we're shifting into this post-COVID world. The lines between work and life have gotten much, much more blurry as things have gone online, and remote work and hybrid work has increased a lot. So digitally, at our center, we always recommend that students use Clemson emails on their professional documents, so their resumes, cover letters, CVs. This can be a way to boost your credibility, but it also can be really helpful for your own sake to have those things separate. All the work stuff is going to your school email, which is already kind of like a job, and your personal email is just personal. Because once a company has your personal email, now that's going into their system, and you're going to get all of that in your personal email. Another strategy, which is available now on both iPhones and Android phones, is a focus mode. So these are features where you can block out certain apps. Maybe it's Canvas for school, maybe it's your school email on your Outlook app, and maybe you want to have those things on your phone during the day so that you can see things in real time, but you don't want to have that blowing up your phone on a Friday night. There's a way that you can set a focus mode so that it'll block out notifications from certain apps after hours. And moving from your digital space to your physical space, there's also ways that you can set boundaries, even in your own home. If you're working digitally or working remotely, you can designate areas within your apartment or your dorm as a work zone versus a work-free zone. So maybe you want to do all of your work at a specific desk, and that's where you're going to open Outlook, and that's where you're going to do all your work. And once you close your computer, you're not going to do it anywhere else in your house. For me personally, I refuse to do my homework while I'm sitting on my bed. I'll do my homework on my desk, on my sofa, but when I'm sitting on my bed, I won't do homework because my bed is for sleeping. And if I go to bed and I'm thinking about homework things now, like I want to keep those things separate. And so think about ways that you can use your dorm or your apartment as ways to kind of have a designated work area or else have these designated work free areas. The last way to set boundaries is to learn how and also learn when to say no to demands that are excessive. Um, and we're going to talk through this a little bit more because this is probably the hardest boundary to set. Um, and so I wrote up a little scenario, and we're going to talk through the scenario. And I left it pretty big. So I really want you to put yourself in the shoes of this person in whatever industry or job you're going into. So the scenario is that you are successfully fulfilling the duties at your job. You're doing great. And a coworker presents you with an opportunity to represent your company outside of work hours. And it's at a time that you already had pre-made plans with your friends. So in order to accept this offer, you would stand out and you don't want to disappoint your coworker. But at the same time, you're already at full capacity with the tasks that you're doing right now. And they're tasks that you're doing well, but you're just at full capacity and you wouldn't have adequate time to prepare to represent the company at this event. So I want you to kind of think through this scenario, think through, would you say yes or would you say no? And we're going to walk through kind of what each of those options would look like. So the very first thing to ask yourself in this scenario is this an essential part of my job description? Or is this some opportunity to go above and beyond? Because if this is just a part of the everyday work that you do, that you signed on the contract that you were going to do, then there's probably not a good chance that you can just say, no, I don't want to do that. But if this is some sort of opportunity to go above the work that you normally do, some opportunity to stand out, that's where you have a little bit more leeway with being able to set these boundaries when you need to. And so if we said yes to this demand, what would be the benefits? First thing is increased credibility at work. You know, you are gaining that reputation as somebody who's a go-getter, who has initiative. You're also maintaining this positive relationship with your coworker. But at the same time, there's also consequences of saying yes. One of these is that you may not perform as well or represent the company as well because you haven't had the capacity to prepare for this above and beyond event because you're already at full capacity with the tasks that you've been regularly asked to do. Another consequence could be you're disrupting your positive relationships with your friends. That doesn't mean that none of them are going to be your friends because of this one instance. But it is good to think about patterns ahead of time because these things do become patterns. And as we're emerging professionals and as we're thinking about the way that we're going to show up in work and show up in life for the rest of our lives, we want to go ahead and set the standards now and set the patterns now of how we're going to show up for our friends or how we're going to show up at the workplace. So that's just something to keep in mind. Another consequence of saying yes is that this is just one domino, but over time, taking on more and more of these overwhelming responsibilities could increase the risk of burning out long term. And that would start to impair your ability to do those tasks that you were already asked to that are an essential part of your job because you're taking on these higher opportunities. So if we were to say no on the other side, there's a couple limiting beliefs. We mentioned limiting beliefs earlier. There's a couple limiting beliefs that could come up when you think about saying no. One of these is I'm a failure because I can't take on this responsibility. Another one is my coworker will be mad at me and my reputation at work will be damaged. And so we're going to think about reframing these beliefs the way that we have throughout the night, which is acknowledging the reality of the problem, but looking at that problem from a different perspective. And so for the first limiting belief, the reframed one is that I am performing all of my assigned responsibilities proficiently, and I have the self awareness to know that I may not have the capacity to complete these responsibilities as effectively if I take on this extra task. The one about the coworker relationship is that I can't take responsibility for my coworker's reaction. However, I can control my own actions by communicating my needs clearly and respectfully to my coworker. So as we talk about this balance between going above and beyond and doing the essential tasks, um, I really want to make sure to highlight that going above and beyond is not a bad thing. It's great when you have the capacity to take initiative and to do extra tasks. That's wonderful if you really want to stand out. It's when it is unsustainable in a way that starts to lead to burnout. That's when you maybe want to consider saying no to those things. But it's definitely not a bad thing inherently. It's just you want to be really mindful about setting those boundaries when you need to. So the last step of personal and professional life balance is utilizing supports. And so your very first support and your very best advocate throughout your professional life is going to be yourself. So we're going to talk about some ways that you can support yourself when these stressful feelings come up because the workplace is a very inherently stressful environment. There are a lot of different things that can add to anxiety, you know, lots of deadlines, lots of high expectations, presentations, all of these things can lead to increased feelings of anxiety. And so one way that you can really help yourself out in these moments is and support yourself is mindful breathing. And that can sound a little bit reductive because we all breathe all day, every day. But I want you to think about when you're experiencing anxiety, what are you experiencing? Maybe it's a higher heart rate, increased blood pressure, your palms are sweating. And a lot of these physiological symptoms are completely out of your control. But the one physiological symptom that is in your control is your rate of breathing. So that's something that you can take control of. And when you take control of your breathing, you are able to, you're sending a message from your conscious to your unconscious brain that you are in control and things are going to be okay. And so, one tool that you can use is called box breathing. This is this idea where you inhale, it's very structured. You inhale for 5 counts through your nose, and then you hold it for 5 counts. Then you exhale for 5 through your mouth, and then you just hold it again for 5. And again, it's very, very simple. It's very easy to remember, but you can do that for a couple minutes before you're going into a big presentation, before you have a meeting that you're going to be sharing in. Maybe there's a really big deadline coming up and you're just starting to get a little bit overwhelmed. Take a few seconds, even if you just do it 3 times. That's only 1 minute of your day that you're able to just check in with yourself, take control of your breathing, and tell your unconscious mind that things are okay. You are in control. And so we are all going to practice this real quick. And what I want you to do is to check in with yourself while we're doing this. Um, I want you to think about some of the physiological symptoms that you might also be experiencing. Maybe your shoulders are hunched, maybe your jaw is clenched, and try and relax some of these while we're doing this. And I'm going to reshare my screen. And we're not going to do it for all 3 minutes, but we are going to do it for about a minute. All right, we're going to do it one more time. Inhale through your nose and just hold that for 5 counts. And exhale through your mouth. We're going to hold that for 5 counts. All right, thank you all so much for participating in that. I really want you to check in with yourself, kind of see how you're feeling after that. Think about how you're feeling before and after. And that can be a really helpful way to kind of in the moment when you're feeling those feelings of anxiety at the workplace, just be able to kind of check in with yourself and reset and recenter yourself. Something that can also be helpful if those feelings continue is something called the 5-4-3-2-1 technique. And this is kind of if you tried mindful breathing, you've tried kind of relaxing yourself and you just still feel on edge. This is a way to combat that by using all 5 of your senses. So look around and just identify what are 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and then 1 thing that you can taste. Sometimes these feelings of anxiety make us kind of lose touch with reality, and so this can be a really helpful way to kind of ground yourself back in the moment. And again, it's very easy to remember. It's just 5-4-3-2-1, each of your senses, and that can be a really helpful way to kind of ground yourself right before a really stressful event. As we talk about utilizing supports, I also want to let you know about the supports that we have here at the CCPD. We have tailored resources on the career.clemson.edu site. That's our brand new website. We have a ton of resources for all students. We also have tailored resources for students in underrepresented populations, kind of connecting back to that diversity statement I talked about at the beginning. We want to make sure to support you and to make sure that you are finding the jobs where you're going to feel safe and supported. We also have career counseling appointments every day in the morning and the afternoon. Every weekday, you can come in for a career counseling appointment that you can schedule online, or you can just drop in the afternoons, again, any day of the week. You can just walk right in with a resume, or maybe you're just feeling overwhelmed about the job search process and you want to talk through it with somebody. Maybe you have an interview coming up and you just want to talk through that. We're here for you every day of the week in the afternoon. There will be counselors here who are happy to meet with you. Another thing that can be really helpful in your confidence, especially earlier, we were talking about imposter syndrome, this feeling that maybe you don't quite belong somewhere. Something that can really help in your confidence is dressing the part. And that's going to look different across different industries. But we do have a career closet here. It's in Lever Hall, room 120. And we have free professional outfits, and their outfits kind of across the span of business casual to business professional. And we actually have a surplus of them right now. So as far as I've been told so far, it's usually there's a limit of 2 per semester, but right now you can kind of take whatever would be helpful for you right now because we have so many clothes at the moment. So definitely check that out. You do get free professional outfits through our center. It's a great thing to take advantage of, especially as you're going into the workplace. Another thing for utilizing supports, I wanted to put this QR code here. This is going to take you to a website with a lot of the other support systems that are available to you on campus. It's not just us, there's also CAPS, there's also a lot of different, Office of Advocacy and Success, the Ombuds Office. There's so many supports around you. And if you aren't looking for support within the school setting, there's also a lot of local resources and national resources that can be helpful. And so if you want to go ahead and scan that QR code, it's going to take you to that website. I'll give you just a minute to do that. All right, and that concludes our workshop for today. I'm really grateful that you all were here today. I really appreciate your engagement. You all did such a great job reframing those beliefs earlier, and I just really appreciated your vulnerability and sharing how adjusting to the workplace has impacted you thus far. Um, if you we have a little survey that we'd love for you to fill out. If you haven't put your Clemson email in the chat yet, I would ask that you just go ahead and do that now. That's going to help me out because I can send out a copy of this presentation as well as a couple other resources. And if you wouldn't mind just filling out that survey at some point, that helps us to know how we can better our services. If anyone has any questions, now is a great time to ask. You can throw it in the chat. And otherwise, thank you all so much for being here. And I really appreciate your time. And I hope you have a great rest of your night.